Hey there. I'm about to start making some bread and putting some things together for that now. So we're going to make a really simple bread today. And it's just going to be a pan-cooked flatbread, actually. And so I've just got everything here organized in front of me. And I'm going to just take you step by step as to how we're going to prep this today. First thing today that I got is just half a cup glass of water. I've melted some sugar into that, and at the moment it's a little bit warm. And to that we're going to put some yeast into it. So I just bought some dried yeast. They come in little satchels. They come in at around 35-gram packages. And what we're going to do that with this is we're just going to put it straight into this warm water with the sugar inside. Now, just in case you don't know, the yeast is actually a really tiny kind of fungus, like a mushroom, if you will. They are single cellular, and they are alive still. When they get dried, of course, and stored in these packets, they go to sleep for a little bit, but you need to wake it up after it gets dried. So why we need to put this yeast into warm water like this is not only do we want to wake the yeast back up again, but we want to feed the yeast a little bit. So the yeast wakes up when it gets put back into around body temperature. So at the moment this water is somewhere between 30 to 50 degrees. And the easiest way to know whether water is warm enough or not too hot for the yeast is simply just by putting your finger in. It needs to feel warm, but it shouldn't be so hot that you couldn't just keep your finger in there. So if you're in doubt, or you can always just grab a thermometer, stick it in there. If you do use a finger method, just make sure your hands are clean before you do that, all right? And so what happens is the yeast, being little alive cells of fungi, they would actually start eating the sugar inside the water. Normally with this recipe, I'd use soy milk. Milk works as well. But if I actually don't have either of those things here today at home, so sugar and water works perfectly fine. This way you get a little bit of a sweeter bread. I personally like it with a soy milk. It gives it a little bit of a nuttiness to it. This is absolutely great as well. So what you want to do is you want to give it a good stir. You want to make sure that the yeast is all broken up and mixed into the liquid. And what we need to do here is we need to wait and give it around 10 minutes so that we give a little bit of time for the yeast to wake up, to start eating a little bit of that sugar. And also at the same time, the yeast is going to start growing. It's going to start expanding and multiplying inside the water so that you'll actually get a little bit more yeast than you started off with. The way you know whether this is done is when it starts bubbling. Now, if you use cold water, or if you use cold soy milk or cold milk, and you put the yeast straight in there, give it a mix, it doesn't matter. Like if you just wait 10 minutes, it's not going to bubble up. And that's how you know, like the bubbles is how you know it's starting to work. The bubbles, like if you imagine yeast as a little alive animal, they really love eating stuff. They love eating sugars in particular. And when they eat the sugar, they need to get rid of it somehow. So they end up farting it out, if you will, in like little bubbles of air called carbon dioxide. And as well as that, they kind of convert some of the sugars into other flavor compounds. And that's why we get that nice yeasty bread flavor as opposed to just eating straight flour. So that doesn't look too bad. We're going to let that rest for 10 minutes and we'll come back to it. Okay, well look, it's only been 3 or 4 minutes and it's already bubbled up quite a lot. It's getting to the top of the glass now and you can already see the bubbles collecting on the top there. I thought I'd just take this opportunity before I pour it out to explain what yeast is, all right? So yeast, it's like a bacteria in the sense that they're little organisms that multiply by eating like sugars or fats, and the single cells split off and become more little cells, and then they keep on getting bigger and bigger and growing faster and faster. The thing is, bacteria and yeast both grow best at certain temperatures. So for yeast here, usually around 30 to 50 degrees is the best temperature for it to grow. It multiplies the quickest. Whereas if you have yeast at a low temperature, like if it was in the fridge at like 5 degrees, it would actually do this, but it would do it very, very slowly. The yeast are just less active and they're going to work less hard and they're going to multiply a lot slower. And in that way, it's the same as bacteria. Bacteria on food in warm temperatures between around 20 to 50 degrees will multiply really, really quickly. But below that temperature, both yeast and bacteria will multiply very slowly until around 0 degrees, when it will just stop multiplying, period. Or if it gets above, say, around 55 degrees, bacteria start slowly dying. And the hotter it is, the faster the yeast and the faster the bacteria dies. So if you leave this yeast now and I put it in a pot and I boiled it, all the yeast would actually die. And then if I just put more sugar in it or more water in it, it's not going to do anything. Whereas if I moved some of this now into another cup of warm water, it will continue expanding again. So as you can see here, the yeast is getting really big. It's getting right to the rim there. That's absolutely fantastic. What that means is the yeast is having lots of fun eating up all that tasty sugar, farting out all that gas. And you can see if I just give it a quick stir, I'll take out some of the air that's trapped in that liquid. And it sinks a little bit again. How cool is that? Ooh, it smells like bread already. All right, so what we're going to do from here is we're going to start making the bread. Now, I've got out a wooden board, and usually it's easiest just to make bread on a wooden board. But at the same time, I don't want to make a huge mess, and I live in a little tiny place, so I don't want to need to clean up everything after this. So I'm going to make the bread in a pot, all right? Feel free to do the same thing. I don't have any other metal bowls, but this pot will do me just fine. And with bread, it's actually just 3 simple ingredients. You can have a few other ingredients on top if you want to make it a little bit fancy. But all bread is essentially it's flour, yeast, and water. So I've already got the yeast and I've already got the water here. And that's activating very, very well. And now I've already got some flour, just plain white flour measured out. I've got my bowl and I've got a sieve. And what I want to do is I want to start sieving out the flour so it's not so clumpy. So all a sieve is just a device with lots of little holes in it. And I'm going to put in my flour in a little bit at a time and just give it a little bit of tap, and we can see the flour coming out already. And we just have to be a little bit patient with that. See, just a few taps and most of it's gone. Now with the flour, a recipe would give you a standard amount of flour, but for bread, it actually depends on so many different things as to how much flour you're going to need to use. The weather makes such a big difference as to the consistency of bread that you're going to be making, and also how much flour you're going to be needing. Today is quite a warm day. It's a little bit humid, so there's a chance that we might not need as much flour as we do, or we might need more. But the best thing to do is we want to use most of the flour, keep some behind, and so we start making the bread. And if we feel like we need more flour, we could always do that, or we could always add it in later. So basically what we're going to do today is it's just flour and a teaspoon of salt. Now salt here is just for flavor. It doesn't have anything to do with the chemistry of the bread. The most important parts is the flour and the yeast. Well, actually, and the water as well, obviously. So what happens is with flour, there's a thing it's like a sugar, I guess, called gluten, which is in flour. And normally when we start mixing the liquid in with the flour, you're going to start developing the gluten inside this flour, inside the flour. And that, okay, just taking a step back really quickly. What I'm doing is I'm putting only a little bit of liquid in at a time. It's easier using your hands for this, honestly. And what we're going to do is we're going to just mix the liquid into the flour a little bit at a time, just picking it up as much as we can. And it's going to stick a little bit to your hands, but already really quickly we're getting a really nice soft dough there. And we're going to just work the liquid through the bread. And already we can see it's getting quite goopy already. And now if it gets too goopy, we're going to add more flour to it. And so all we need to do is just sieve more flour. And I might need a little bit more flour today than I expected. Just mixing that through. Just turning it, pushing down, and then turning it around and pushing it down. Very easy. And once it gets mixed through and it feels a little bit dry and hard, then just add a little bit more liquid. I'm just going to put that all in there for now. So it's just the first step of making bread is just making sure it's all mixed through. And now again, getting back to what gluten is what makes this bread sticky, right? And what gluten looks like is it looks like long elastic band. And when you start working it, ooh, I need a lot more flour here. And my jar is out, so excuse me. My hands are very creepy, isn't it? So you basically just want, now usually you follow a recipe and the recipe guides you really, really well. Here I'm just cooking with my eyes a little bit. I kind of have an idea of what kind of textures I want. So I could just go by sight. Again, partly because I haven't been very prepared. I actually don't have any scales or measuring cups or anything like that. So I'm just going by sight today. Hope you forgive me. But otherwise, if you have a set of scales, do use those. They would be very helpful. And follow a strict recipe, because you're always going to get the best results off a recipe. Somebody's probably tried the recipe many times before and have tweaked it until they get all the levels right. And if you get bread all clogged up in your fingers like this, just get a spoon or a butter knife, nothing too sharp, and just scrape your fingers down. And here you go, it just starts coming off your fingers. So what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to make it into a big old ball of dough. And once we get the big old ball, then we're going to start forming it a little bit. And then from there, we'll show you once we get there, won't we? So going back again, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but what we're doing here is we're just creating a ball of stickiness, if you will, right? But the stickiness, the gluten, the bits which make it sticky, the stickiness are like elastic bands, but they're all like long and straight, but all like curled on top of each other at the moment, and they don't go any directions in particular. So what you want to do with bread is you want to develop that stickiness by working it. And by working, and I mean by kneading it, by pulling it. And what that does is it straightens out the gluten. And by straightening out the gluten, what you end up getting is you end up getting a much more, getting all the gluten in straight lines, and that's how the bread feels a little bit more chewy. Now, I've got most of the dough dough'd up here, and now we need a nice dry table. Powder it with a little bit of flour, just so that it doesn't stick to your table. Now, it's best to use wood again, but you can use other surfaces if you don't have anything. Just make sure it's nice and clean. Otherwise, again, you don't want any other bacteria growing inside your nice warm piece of sugary, gluteny dough. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just knead it just a little bit. So when you're kneading bread, it's actually quite simple. The easiest way is just fold it in half, push it together, turn it around, and just push it. And just keep on turning it. I know I'm recording on my laptop, and so the quality is not going to be fantastic. It's a little bit shaky, but we'll give that a shot. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it, fold it in half like this. So there's a line, and then I'm just going to push and roll, push and roll. And that way, the gluten, the kind of elasticy kind of bands, they're kind of straightening up and getting longer. And that's how you get the chewiness. Now, I'm going to use just a little bit of flour because it's getting a little bit sticky. I don't want it to stick against the board too much. And for this bread, I don't want it too chewy, right? Because I'm going to make a flat bread. But if I want it a lot more chewier, I'll need to work it a lot more. But basically, what I want to do is I want to work it until it's nice and smooth. There's no big lumps in it. And it's about the same consistency the whole way through. It's not like sticky on one part and dry and hard on the other. Just one whole piece. And so what we're going to do is, inside this bread now, inside this dough, there's all the goodness from the flour, there's the yeast, there's the water, there's some salt, and a little bit of sugar. And there's so much goodness in this bread, right? But when we eat bread, we don't want to eat like this hard lump of solid dough. What we want to have is this airy dough with lots of little air pockets in it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to let the yeast continue to grow into this, inside this bread. Continue to eat some of that sugar and some of the goodness from the flour. Let it continue farting out some of the good gluten, the air. And the air is going to get trapped in tiny little bubbles inside this bread. The gluten, because it's stretchy, is actually going to hold the bread together, and it's going to form, like trap the little air bubbles inside this bread. And what's going to happen is this little piece of bread is going to grow a lot bigger. So what we want to do is, this is a pretty pro trick. I'm going to shake the table quite a lot doing this, but we want to roll the ball out a little bit, just so that it's a little bit more smooth. We're going to make it into a little ball. How beautiful is that? And then we're going to put it, just wrap it up. We don't want to wrap it up too tight. We want it to breathe, because remember, bread is a living thing. This isn't, it has lots of happy little yeasts in there. They're all awake now. They are excited to eat all this dough, like all this flour, and become bread. And so we're going to let it just rest, eat it, grow up, and get a lot bigger, all right? So what we want to do, how we want to do that is cover it with some, we won't use this pot again. Cover it with put it in a bowl, cover it really gently with some cling wrap, just so that nothing gets onto our happy little dough. Let it breathe a little bit, all right, but tuck it in, and then we'll get a second piece just to make sure nothing comes in and disturbs him while he's asleep, all right? But again, still not covering him too tight, just letting him rest, all right? And we're gonna let him rest for around, as long as you like, really, but no, well, not as long as you like, but at least half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe a good hour if you like. You just want to rest until it gets around twice its size. And now again, it's a little bit warm today, so it's going to grow a little bit faster than usual. If it's a cold day, it's going to grow a little bit slower. And let's pause this video and we'll see what happens in half an hour. It's been half an hour, and honestly, look at this guy. He's grown quite a bit, hasn't he? He's about not quite half his size yet, but what I'm thinking is maybe we would let him rest for another hour or so. But what we're going to do is beforehand, we're going to just punch him out once. And now what's happening here is we've got lots of air trapped underneath all that dough, as I said earlier. I'm going to find my flour again. And again, the yeast inside has started eating some of the flour as well. The sugar inside the flour, actually. And it's starting to grow. And so what we're going to do is, as it's trapped all this air inside, we don't want it to get just too filled with air so that the yeast can't grow into the other parts of the bread. Oh, let me take that out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're just going to punch it or knock it once, right? And what that is it's just pushing it in, folding it, getting all the air out, just getting it into a nice tight ball again. And now keep in mind, because the yeast is eating the sugar out of the flour, the longer you let this bread rest, the more it's going to change flavors. And that's not necessarily, it's not necessarily a good thing. You might want a bread that's slightly sweeter, and so you probably want to cook it sooner. Or if you want a bread that's a little bit more sour, then you can let it ferment for stay around for a little bit longer. I'm just using regular yeast today, but if you use the sourdough starting yeast, then not only do you have yeast in there, but you also have other bacteria in there, and the longer you keep it, the more different flavors it's going to pick up. And as you probably tasted with sourdough before, it's quite a sour bread. All the different bacteria grow different compounds, but as well as that, a lot of the sugar gets eaten up by the yeast and the bacteria, so it doesn't have as much sweetness to counteract the sourness, and that's why it's sourdough. There you are. But this is just yeast, so it shouldn't be too sour. I've punched it once. This is half an hour. I might come back to this in an hour's time. I'll probably punch it one more time in between, and we'll see where we get that from there. All right. So it's been an hour, and I've already given her another punch, and she's still pretty big, isn't she? There you are. So that's what our bread looks like at the moment. Just expanded a little bit here. We're going to pull her out again onto our board. A little bit of flour on that board already, so that she doesn't stick. We're going to press her one more time, just to make sure all the air is out. And then we're going to start shaping it. Now, with bread, you can shape it a lot of different ways. Today we're going to make flatbreads. I could show you some other forms, other shapes of bread as well. But I have to say, I really do enjoy making bread. Bread is the closest thing to magic that's possible for people, I believe. You're really playing with life, yeah? Making something from nothing. And yeah, it's just a fun experience all in all. So here we have it, a very soft piece of bread. Now I'm going to make it into a nice little ball. What we want to do, how we ball it, especially when it's this big, is you just press it, a hand on each side, press down, and then just roll it under your hand. So it's nice and smooth, and you'll get this little line down the bottom. That's normal, that's totally fine. And we'll just tuck it in so that it's nice and smooth like that. Then we'll get a knife. And with this piece of bread, with this piece of dough, we want to cut it into 4 different sections. So just mark it off. Yeah, that looks about good for us. Just a nice sharp knife, and you want to pull it long, all right? Don't just slice down into it, or otherwise you don't really cut the bread, all right? Now that we have 4 pieces, we're going to make them into little balls again. Need a little bit of strength, but it's going to shake the table quite a lot. Make it nice and round. And with each one of these, we're going to make it into a flatbread. Now, again, as I've said before, when we want the little air bubbles inside the bread, and actually you can see it on this piece here. See the little air bubbles in the bread? We want that, but I'm also pressing a lot of it out. So after we shake the bread, we're going to want to let it rest again for another 10 more minutes so that it could have just a few bubbles in it. We don't want the bubbles too big. And then we could start cooking it from there. Alright, so just the last one here. And then we're going to shake it. Alright, so we've got 4 little balls, and from here you can make a lot of different shapes of bread, right? So for example, you can make like a little dinner roll, just squeeze it out. And then you've got a little dinner roll shape here, or you can turn it into a long strip and make a breadstick, or you can weave it into different shapes. But for today, we're just going to make some flatbread. And now you can see already it's pretty chewy at the moment. Somebody's borrowed my rolling pin. I'm back. Found my rolling pin again. So we're going to make some flatbreads, and so what we're going to do is we're going to roll them into little circles. Again, just a little bit more flour on the table before we start that. Now there's a lot of ways to sprinkle flour. You can always shake your hand like this sideways and it'll get it nice and even, but you don't want to throw it around too much because that's a lot of cleaning. A little bit of flour on top so it doesn't stick. And if your bread's really wet, you probably want to put a little bit of flour on your rolling pin as well. Again, so that it doesn't stick. And we just want to make nice little circles like this. You don't have to make them perfectly round. That's totally fine. Just don't make them too thick. I personally like my breads a little bit on the thin side, but you can make them a little thicker than this if you like. Keep in mind, you are going to let them rest, and so they are going to just get a little bit higher than they are right now. They're going to rise in the oven as well. Whenever we do one, finish one, just so that they don't stick to each other, we want to put a little bit of flour on that. Just dust that off. Alright. Put that to the side. And whenever they're not doing anything, just cover them. Alright. These guys as well. If you're not using them, just cover them. Oop, don't let that one escape. Just so that dust doesn't fall on them, or like anything accidentally happens to them. A little bit more flour again around this one, and we'll just roll them out. If it starts sticking to the board, just add a little bit more flour, that's not a problem. Starting to stick a little bit, so we'll just a little bit of flour. Don't go too crazy with the flour. And the trick here is roll it one direction, and then once you've got that direction, turn and flip just by 90 degrees, and then just roll the other direction, and it comes back roughly round again. There you go. And when you lift it up, it's a little bit elastic, so it's going to get the shape again. It's going to come back a little bit smaller again. Doesn't matter so much if they're different sizes, that's always fun. And just stack them up on top of each other. For now, a little bit of flour again. And we're going to just make 4 flatbreads today. And then after we shape these breads, we're going to, there's actually 2 different ways you can cook this bread. Like the most normal, the most easiest way, I think, is just in the oven. If you have a stone in your oven, that makes it easier as well. But it's also, I like doing it in a pan, because pans are just fun. You get to see exactly what you're doing. You get to play around with it a little bit more. And you can watch the bread totally slowly transform from just dough like this, really stretchy, almost see-through dough, into bread. And we'll talk about what that would look like in just a bit. So I'm going to just roll out this one. I like it just a little bit thinner, but you can have it nice and thick, like a little bit thicker than this as well. You don't want it to be too thin. You want some chewiness to it, definitely. And now these, you can use it as just flatbread, but I've actually cheated and used them as pizza bases as well. So just roll them into nice little circles, and then after you roll them out, after you let them rest for a bit, just put some tomato paste on it, a little bit of cheese, some herbs, a little bit more vegetables if you're into that, and then you just stick it in an oven and bake it off, and then you get this fresh made pizza that you've made by yourself. Oof. If I really want to keep on doing these kind of videos, I'm going to need to get a better camera, I think. Alright, so that's our last piece. I'm going to put that on top of the other guys, and then let them all rest for a bit. So again, when we let them rest, after they've been shaped like this, just want to cover them. So I'll just throw this on, make sure they're not sticking. Good. I'll throw this on top of my little pile here. What? A little bit of flour. Make sure they're not sticking. Nah, they look pretty good actually. And then we'll just cover that up. And it doesn't need any more than 10 minutes just to get a little bit more bubbles. And we'll start cooking them up. How's that sound? Fantastic. Alright, so it's kind of hard to see, but I've already got one piece of bread on the toaster. And all you need to do for this, it's pretty easy. I'm going to just put this aside. What you need to do is, you just need to get a pan. And you get it nice and hot, alright? Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab one slice of this bread. And now this bread we've already rolled out. It's very, very thin. Very, very soft. And it's kind of expanded just a little bit from before, but we don't want to squash it again. We want to keep the little air bubbles in this time. And now once we get the pan nice and hot, we're going to just gently put it in, and we're going to just let it cook on the pan for about 2 or 3 minutes aside until it turns golden brown. And then once it's done, take it off and you just let it rest. And already you can see that the little air bubbles are starting to come up from between the bread. And I'll show you again once it's ready to flip. Alright, so I just flipped it and look at that. It's gone golden brown. And if I turn it around, it's got some color on it. And that's exactly what you want. You want to have a little bit of color in there. Alright, I'm just going to finish making these because it's pretty hard to cook with one hand and a laptop in the other. And I'll show you once it's done. So I just finished making the bread, and honestly I was going to show you a photo, like a video of it and what to do with it. But my parents just dropped over. They probably must have smelt the bread from all the way wherever they are. And now it's all gone. It's just gone. We ate it all. All 4 pieces of bread, gone. So I'm going to show you a photo of it. What we did was we just, while it was still steaming hot, just spread a little bit of butter on it. Now you can just get a little solid lump and move it around, or you can melt some butter and just brush it onto the top. That's just the easiest way. And you can have it by itself, or you can have it as a wrap, or you can have it in lots of different ways. So the world's your oyster. Give it a shot. Thanks for watching. Catch you soon. Bye.